Hey, good night, everyone. It is Thursday, April 27th. This is session 6. We're going to talk about higher order functions today, and then we're going to get into the challenges. It is about 13 after. So, does anyone have any questions that they have as far as anything Guillermo said yesterday, or anything else we've learned in class, or anything that you've run into outside of class? More than happy to tackle that stuff. Like I said, I want to make sure that we're tailoring this to what your expectations are of the class so that you're learning as much as possible. Okay, so don't see any questions coming through, so we'll go ahead and get started. So higher order functions it's another type of function, and all it is a function that operates on other functions either by taking them in as arguments or by returning them, are called higher order functions. And these are they aren't super common so far, uh, but they will be more common once you start to get into object-oriented programming, and information gets passed around quite a bit between functions. And so if we say, like we've got the example here, so function add num1, num2, let answer num1 plus num2 return answer. And we've got multiply as another function over here. And then we've got a function arithmetic. And so we're feeding in num1, num2. And then now we have a third parameter called calc. And we can say let answer equal calc num1, num2. And this allows us to feed in other functions into it. So let's go ahead and draw these up here real quick. So we could say something like const add equals AB, return A plus B. Const multiply equals AB, return A times B. All right. And why are you cranky? Oh, because I missed my fat arrow. All right. So now these are just normal functions, right? So if I do console.log add 1, 2, I would expect to see 3 over here, right? There's my 3. And so now we can create a higher order function. So we can say const, we'll just call it calculator. And we're going to have A, B, and then also calc. And what this allows us to do is do something like this. So calc, which is just a variable, so it's another placeholder, and it can resolve into whatever else you're telling it to resolve into. So we could say calc AB, right? And so now we're just returning this function out of here. So if we take this and we say calculator, and we've got 1, 2, if we run it, nothing will happen. We should get an error, right? So calc is not a function, because nothing's getting passed through. And right, so like nothing's been done here. But if I put in add, right? So if we take a look over here, we've got this page here, right? So we throw in add. What's going to happen is we're going to be able to then turn this calc. So remember, we see the variable name, right? But in actuality, what the computer sees is this, right? So when I pass this into calculator, that's what happens here. And then the same thing on this line, we're going to be returning add 1, 2, right? So that's, even though we've got A, B, and calc, like this is what's actually happening inside the function.
So basically, where you have calc, you could have easily just called calc C. It's just calc is so we understand what it is, that it's a function or whatever. It's a different type of a parameter, but it could be any real name. So it could have just been A, B, C, but C ends up being a function that you're bringing in for math.
Yep. Yeah. So this could be
Okay.
Ham, Sammy, right? And we still get 3, but this doesn't help. And honestly, like, I'm being lazy here. Like, this should be like num1.
Right, just more descriptive late.
Right. Something a little bit more descriptive. And the same thing here, right? So num1, num2, and calc. And then same thing down here. This should be calc, num1, num2, right? And so even though I've changed everything around, I still get 3, right? So and it's one of the things to, like, when you're first learning, like, to grasp is that the variable names have nothing to do with what actually happens. You can call these things anything you want to, right? This could be peanut butter and jelly, and you can return peanut butter plus jelly, and it's going to add those 2 numbers. But we should be practicing good naming, right? So giving descriptive names. And it is, so this is something where right, so like this was a just a challenge that someone dropped in one of the pre-work classes today, and I solved it on my own. Let's, oops, don't want to do that. Let's go ahead, back out of this, and do should have some React in here. Yeah, React project, CD, React, ls. So right, so this is a JavaScript framework called React. And so this is something that you would work towards in Code Platoon. Like, this is like kind of the last big framework that you learn to use. So you learn JavaScript and Python, and then you learn how to work with a database, which is SQL or SQL. And then you're going to learn HTML, CSS. Then you're going to learn Django, which is a Python backend framework. And then you're going to learn React, which is a front end JavaScript visual framework. And now when you start looking at more complex code, you can see how important it is to give good names, right? So like, even if you don't know what React is, you can, just by the name of this, you can kind of get an idea of what's going on here, right? Like, this code is dealing with a name being changed, right? And so like, this code is going to be dealing with storing a person. And right, so this code looks like it's going to be responsible for deleting someone, right? And so by giving good names, it makes things more reasonable, right? And you should honestly, and again, it's my bad, I set the wrong example, like, because I use AB all the time when I'm explaining things, but you should almost always never have a 1-letter variable. Like, that is a red flag. It's a no-no in code outside of like the letter I, inside of a for loop, where you know that I is an iterator. That's just like a standard. But like, persons, button class, and again, it's okay to try and carve things down. But like, again, we're not working on punch cards anymore. We're not working on like Commodore 64s that have like 80 characters before they wrap, and it becomes a nightmare to read the code. Like, we are working in modern IDEs where character space is free. So even if this seems like really long, like delete person handler or name change handler, right? It is better to have something that seems a little more verbose, but details what is happening, so that people that aren't as familiar with the code, right? Like, if I'm working on this, and then I push this feature up, and then 2 weeks later, something needs to be added to it, and another developer on my team comes in. I want to make it easier for them to pick up context and be able to come back and see what's going on. And then also for myself, if I come back a month or 2 months or 3 months later after I've been working on all these different things, and I forgot what the heck I was even doing over here, that I can come back in here and start clicking around and be like, oh yeah, okay, so this is what I was doing here, right? And so using good names is like from your variables to your function names to when you start to get into frameworks, using good naming for your class names and your component names is going to be a super important part of leveling up as a software developer.
So be kind to yourself and be kind to the DevOps people.
Yep. Well, luckily for the DevOps people, they won't necessarily have to read this code. They're going to be writing the code that houses all of this code and makes it run in the real world. But yes, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, be kind to your future self, are all really important. So feel free to point out if I use a variable name that doesn't seem like it's the variable name I should be using. Don't let me get lazy. But so this is all it is to make a higher order function. And a lot of times there are like this is a higher order function that is being passed in through the parameter. When I was just in VS Code and I had that previous one pulled up, that was actually also a higher order function. Oops, sorry, it's testing. Right, and so this was a and here I can pull this whole thing up, we can read it. So like these are going to be more of the examples that are what am I looking for here? I believe it's pre-work. These are in alphabetical order. All right, so this is once you get accepted into Code Platoon, this is the channel that you'll get added to. Damon, he's great. He just got accepted into Code Platoon about a month ago. He went through the last intro to coding live for JavaScript. So I've been working with him for a couple of months after this. And he's really embraced like the challenges. And so he posted this one and I had some time over lunch. So check that the two provided arrays both contain the same number of different unique items regardless of order. For the example in the following, A, however many times B, and C, how many times, and D, both arrays have 4 of one item and 2 of the other, right? So this has 4 A's and 2 B's. This one has 4 C's and 2 D's. So this would be a balanced array. So the length is the same, and then the number of items they have are identical. And this one was solved by originally solving it for one thing, but notice here I've got a function which is balanced, which is what they asked for, but then I created a second function called array parser, right? That takes the array, loops through it. So a for each is just like doing a for loop, and I'm checking to see if the element is already in. So basically, if there's a key to the name of the letter in my function, or sorry, inside my object, if it's there, I basically add to the count by 1. If it's not there, I create the key and give it a value of 1. And then I sort it. So by the time this function works through, it takes one of these arrays and it basically outputs an array with the number of each item. So there's 3 B's and 5 A's, right? And now I could have written this code twice, all inside the same function. But what I did was I actually took this logic, moved it out into what we would call a helper function. This now becomes a higher order function because it is using another function, and it's using this function twice, once for each array that gets fed into it. And then I'm going through and I'm comparing to see if those functions, or basically if those arrays have the same numbers in them. And if they don't have the same numbers in them, I'll return false. If they do, you return true. And if anyone's used Code Wars before, so like we come in here and this will fail because I actually I just corrected it in place. But if I grab this, because even though it doesn't say it, so if I do this, all my tests will pass, right? So I get proper values, and if I attempt it, so 242 tests passed, 63 of them failed. And the reason being was because I wasn't checking to see if they were the same length or not. So I can say something like if parsed, parsed array 1.length triplet equal or doesn't equal parsed array 2.length return false. And that was all I was doing, is because it doesn't say that you'll get different length ones, and it doesn't show you. So sometimes when it fails, you don't know why. You just got to kind of take a guess at it. Oh, parsed, because I still spelled it wrong somehow. There we go. All right, and now I've passed all 305 tests under a second. Right, and so this is another version of a higher order function. And this is also Code Wars. For those of you that haven't looked at it before, this is great. You can narrow down by language. So JavaScript, you can get some Python practice in here, Ruby, TypeScript. You can join the Code Platoon clan. There's a little ranking board of who's done challenges. Guillermo, so like I said, you can see Damon, he also goes by Lamar, is really, they said he went through this course in December, and he's really cranked out the challenges on his own. So I'm imagining he'll do very well once he starts in the next cohort. He's going to be going in uniform. But this is a great way to get practice. And it's also, you get a rank, and so they start you off at like a rank of 8, and you get challenges that are level 8, which are honestly, most of those are going to be in line with what you would be doing on the challenge list for this class. But then you start getting into the 7s, and 6s are going to be a little bit more difficult. Once you start getting up to like the level 4 and level 3s, they get a little obnoxious. Quite honestly, like some of the challenges go beyond like practical coding and getting into having to know like specific fields of math and how to apply those. So hovering around in that like 6 and 5 area is kind of your sweet spot if you're looking for additional practice. Those 6s and 5s are going to be at the level of like where the actual application problems are at. And the other thing I will throw out is it is good to do additional challenges. Once you get accepted to Code Platoon, you start the pre-work, like they will give you challenges. But it is also important, like if you just do nothing but challenges from the date that you get accepted to Code Platoon to like going through Code Platoon, you're going to kill the first 2 weeks of Code Platoon, but then that's it, right? So it's good knowing how to do the challenges and how to use all of those building blocks, but kind of like what Guillermo touched on yesterday, like learning some Linux command shell, like how to use the CLI, the command line interface, getting familiar with Git, starting like the basics of object-oriented programming, like all of those are going to get you even further down the road. So do challenges. They're fun. They're a good experience. Make sure that you're progressing, right? So like if you're just sticking with the 7 and 8s because you can do them quickly and they're easy, you're not learning anything new. You should always be trying to push up to that next level. I would say up to about level 5. Once you go past level 5, they start getting away from being, like I said, like useful coding challenges and starting to get more esoteric and more specialized and having to know things other than programming to make it work. But yeah, Code Wars is great. Leak Code, any of those challenge ones. And if any of you are on one of these already and you find a challenge that you like or that you particularly enjoyed and you want to share it with the class, you can always drop that and we can always work it in. At the pace we're going, we can work in some outside challenges if we want to. All right. So that was a little digression, but also kind of a good primer of what to be looking out for. All right. And so again, like I said, so when we're putting in variable names, this is what the computer sees. And so we kind of move through this and we're going to end up with that. And again, we can swap this out. So we could say 5 and 5 and we leave it with add. We would expect that we get the number 10. If we swap this out for multiply, right now we get 25. Okay, so just by changing this name here, we switch the functionality that we're using, right? We could do one for subtraction and division, and we could get exponents going, and we could do floor division and all these things, and they would change each time you change this parameter. And one other thing that I'll throw out to you here that is kind of a side, and it's we'll go to Wikipedia. All right, so the solid principles of object-oriented programming are extremely important. You will not really cover these too much in Code Platoon, or at least I didn't. I don't know what things have changed. But like Bob Martin is real big on this, and he's written a lot of books and a lot of like core foundational high level books on what it takes to be a good software developer. Like this Bob Martin, and I'm trying to think of there's a couple other people, Sandy Metz, again, like these top level books that, I mean, as a junior developer, it's a good idea to read. Again, I had the privilege of getting to go through a really education forward apprenticeship where I was required to read books by these individuals, and I can also put out a list of books if people are interested that would help. And so these are all basic principles that help you write basically good software. And the one we would be talking about right here is the single responsibility principle. And that is, there should never be more than one reason for a class to change. In other words, every class should only have one responsibility. And this is something that we strive for, and there's always exceptions to the rule. But what it goes back to when we look at this is that we don't have just one function that does everything. We've separated out the responsibility of these functions, right? So we have a function that is our calculator, and that is responsible for taking in the numbers and also the calculation style, and then basically feeding that in to the calculation style. So this is kind of like our runner, our program runner. And these are all the different programs that we can run in our program runner. And so this is like, it would be very easy to write this code all in one function. And when there's something that's this small, it's not that big of a deal. But when we start writing code where we get to object-oriented programming, and I was showing you the React code and stuff like that, like all of that can be written in one file. It will become an awful mess. And it will become, like I said, the program that I'm working on right now has a couple million lines of code in it between the front end and the back end at this point. And if all of that was written in one file, every time I needed to search for something and had to use the search feature, it would take forever for my IDE to parse through these ginormous chunks of code. And so keeping things small, keeping single responsibility, using good naming are going to be the things that help you keep your files and your program organized, and it makes it easier for you to get around. And again, it seems like overkill or maybe unnecessary when we're writing a 5 or 10 line like functional program. But once you start getting into frameworks and you're doing object-oriented programming with thousands of files and a million lines of code, it becomes indispensable. So the sooner you can get in the habit of following those, the better off you'll be. Yeah, and I'll put together a list of some books that would be good to read, and they're not something that you have to read like to make it into Code Platoon or anything like that, but they would be great books to read once you're done with Code Platoon, or if you're not, again, and I say Code Platoon, you can substitute the boot camp of your choice if Code Platoon isn't going to work out for you, or if you're just going to go it alone. It's that right now we're kind of like right around like this first month of learning, like that's the level this class is at, and Code Platoon is going to give you basically like your first 6 months of learning crammed into 13, 14 weeks. So these books are going to be really good for someone with like 5 to 6 months worth of experience in software development, so that you're already comfortable with the building blocks, the loops, the data objects. And even if you don't know how to use them perfectly, because again, yesterday I said you can't use a switch statement to solve FizzBuzz, and you definitely can. I don't know everything, but there is this base level of experience where these books are going to make sense. And these are also books that you can go back to a year from now or 2 years from now, and they're going to make even more sense, right? Like I've definitely gone back and revisited chapters that I had to read in my apprenticeship where it felt like I was having like a 6-month mental breakdown because things were moving so quickly and it was hard. And like I'm just reading it and maybe not retaining it or understanding all of it, but now that I've got 3 or 4 years experience, I can go back and read those and be like, oh, that's what they meant by that. That makes sense. And so all of that stuff out there is going to help. All right, so that is it for slides. That's a higher order function, is just a function that operates on another, takes in another function or returns a function. So like this one is technically doing both, right? So it's taking in a function and then it's also it's returning the function. It's the function assigned to the variable, but it's still returning the function. Like we don't need to have this let answer. We could just do return calc. Which now that I think of it, is that what I did? Oops, wrong way. Right. So yeah, like I didn't assign it to a variable. I just did the straight return. All right. So, and I guess one other quick thing I'll show you here with this is let's go ahead and grab all of this and let's head back over to Python Tutor for just a second. And Python Tutor is great because it shows you what's happening with those variable assignments. All right, so if I do this and this, let's visualize our execution. All right, so we get this function, we store it into memory as add, we get this function, we store it into memory as multiply, we get this function, we store it in as calculator. And see, we've got num1, num2, and calc over here. Get down to line 14, and now we've got our very first function call, right? And it's going to be 5, 5, and multiply. right? And so it tells you these are what your parameters are. Num1 is 5, num2 is 5, and then calc is now this function, right? Num1, and that is, sorry, this is tiny. That is an asterisk, so that is the multiplication, so that is the multiply, right? So that is what's stored in calc right now, right? And then, so we go up here into multiply, we hit our num1, num2, right? So our two variables, num1, num2, are 5 and 5, right? And the return value out of here is 25. And then our return value out of here is 25, right? And we're done. And so this just helps kind of show what's going on step by step and what the variables are. So I always say if you're not sure, you can always console log your params or your variable just to make sure you're getting what you think you're getting. And if you're still confused, you can always throw it over here into Python tutor and start to walk through the code that you have step by step to make sure that these things are being assigned the values that you think they're being assigned. All right. So any questions about higher order functions or any of the stuff that I just ran through? All right. So let's see here. Let's do a challenge and we're going to grab a challenge. Again, I'll do a warm-up challenge with the class and then we'll do breakout rooms if that's okay with everyone. All right.
I vote yes to that model.
Cool. Yeah, it seemed to be working so far. So let's see here. We finished with FizzBuzz yesterday. Blackjack is just control flow. Detention, we already did rivers. I don't think we did camel case yet. I'll do detention and then we'll probably do camel case as the breakout room. Excuse me. Sorry about that. All right. So let me come over here and grab that little prep snippet. Oh, which I did pin. Copy the code block. Import this. There we go. All right, so all the students in 5th and 6th grade have detention. You can tell a student is in the 6th grade if 6 is the highest number in their student ID. If the highest number in their student ID is less than 6, they are younger, and if it's greater than 6, they are older. The same rule applies for a 5th grade student. Write a method that takes in a student ID as a string of unknown length and returns a Boolean true if that student has detention or false if they do not. All right, so let's go ahead and grab this. Grab this. All right, so we'll go ahead and run this here real quick. We get false and false, so that's looking good. So params, I'm getting one param, which is a string of letters and numbers that represent a student ID. To return one thing, which is going to be a Boolean, if the student has detention, true or false. Example, we'll say see below. All right, so this is a little bit trickier, right? Because we have a string of both letters and numbers, right? And I need to identify the highest number in each string, right? So I need to basically filter out everything that isn't a number in or like a number representation in a string. Let's see here. So all right. So what I typed here is the pseudocode. Does that look pretty good to everyone? As a how we'll get a start on this?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. So we're gonna do a console.log ID. Right. And so there's my IDs. Now, this honestly, like if I was tackling this for real, I would probably just use the dot filter function. Right. So dot filter JS, MDM, so in an array, right, where we can type in something and it will filter based on the criteria that we give it. The way I'm going to tackle it right now is going to be most likely with a loop, which is something. So examine each character and determine if this is a string or number. So we need to iterate and tackle it that way. So let's see here. We could say, well, let me do this. So here's our ID, and we could then split it on every character. Right. And now we've got an array of basically single digit or single character elements. And if we do something like this, and we'll just do an example here real quick. So if I say const x equals a, and I say console.log to int, here, let me look this up. Convert string to integer in JS. Oops. Well, maybe not. So I hate the pop-ups. Again. So parse int. Right. So I can use the parse int function to do that. And so if I come back over here and I say parse int x, I get not a number, right? But if I change this to the string of number one, I get the actual number one. So it's gold, it's not a string anymore, that's the number. So once we get to here, we could take a look at looping through this and trying to parse it to an int. And if it parses to an int, we know that we're interested in it. If it doesn't parse to an int, it's going to basically turn to not a number, is going to be the response, and we can ignore it. So that way we're manually filtering out all of the letters that we have that have no impact on whether or not the student has detention, right? And so now we could say, let highest number equals 0 to start, right? Because we don't know what grade they're in yet. And we could say for let I equal 0, I less than oh, and here we'll do this here real quick. We'll say let array of ID equal this. Say, well, sorry, I is less than array of ID dot length I plus plus, right? And so now we can take our console.log, move that up here, and we could just say array of ID I. So again, this is basically, this is an array now. And so we can access each character by its index position. So when I run this, I would expect that I would see all of this, each of these one right after the other on their own line. Oops. What did I break? So this for but I equals 0, I is less than array of ID dot length. I spelled it wrong. There we go. So there's each of those. And so now if we do something like this and we say parse int, right? So now I isolated the 1, the 3, and the 6. And so now we can do some conditional logic, right? So we can say, let's go ahead and do this. We'll say if is greater than highest number, highest number is equal to that. All right, and so now we'll come down here and we'll take a look at the highest number. All right, so 6. And if we unhook this one, we've got a 6 and a 7. So these are looking good so far. And same thing, even if I put a bunch of numbers after it, right? 7 is still the highest number, so it's not throwing it off. And now we can say something like, if highest number is equal to 6, or oops, 5, or highest number is equal to 6, return true. And then we don't need an else statement here. We could just do return false. And that's because everything that is basically, it's going to, if it's 5 or 6 is the highest number, it's going to end the function here. If it doesn't, it's going to go to the next line of code and it's going to go there. So if we do this now, we get true, true. So this is the solution. Right, and there are different ways to kind of filter this out, but again, and what my hope is with this stuff is if you go in for an interview and you use it built in, like if you just say like, hey, they give you this problem, you say, I'm going to filter, and you filter, they're going to say, and you solve it in a couple lines of code, and you've got a half hour to solve the challenge, and you solve it in 5 minutes. They're going to then turn around and be like, okay, solve it without using the filter built in, or without, right? Because like reverse a string, you can literally just use dot reverse, right? So like you can use 3 built-ins and reverse it, but that doesn't show like the problem solving side of it, and like that how to use a loop and how to construct proper iteration. And so when I show these things, I generally, like I said, I will always focus on like the for loops and the while loops. I think like if you saw when I solved this problem on the outside, right? Like I didn't use a for loop when I was doing my own work. I used a for each, right? Because I understand the difference between a for each and a dot map. And the fact that like I didn't need to return anything, so I'd use a for each out of this. And those are all great things to know, but they aren't things that you need to know to be able to pass like the application problems and make it through the pre-work for Code Platoon. So I would rather have you rock solid with your for loops and your while loops than be iffy on your for loops, while loops, your for ins, your for of, your dot map, your for each, from array, like all of those, like just knowing those 6 or 7 things a little bit, it's better to know these 2 things that will allow you to do all of those rock solid every time. You just know, okay, I've got to use a for loop right here, I've got to use a while loop right here, right? And once you're super comfortable with those, then you start to expand out your repertoire. Any questions on how I solved this problem? All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at, I think I said we were going to take a look at camel case, right? Because I just did detention, we did rivers the other day. So camel case. All right, so there are a couple of variable naming conventions in programming. They are camel case and snake case. We talked about this on the first night. The JavaScript language subscribes camel case, excuse me. Subscribes to camel case. Camel case is a naming convention for a variable that contain multiple words. The entire first word in the variable's name is lowercase. Every subsequent word's first letter is capitalized. There are no spaces or underlines between words. They are all combined together, right? And so if we were to take something that is in snake case, right? So my name is Kramer. This is snake case, and we want to convert it to camel case. This challenge, we'll write the function that takes in a snake case argument and converts the sentence to camel case convention. All right, so we have 7 people tonight. So we could do 3 groups of, so basically 2, 2, 3, or we could do groups of 3 and 4. Does anyone have any preferences?
Probably 3 and 4.
Okay. Or any dissent to that? Okay, so we'll do 2 breakout rooms, 1 of 3, 1 of 4. Let me go ahead and pause this real quick. All right, welcome back from the camel case breakout challenge. So we're going to go over it as a class now. I've got everything set up here, and let's see here. I am sharing my screen. So, okay, we should be good to go. Let me just make sure I've got the chat open. Yeah, I do. All right. So there are a couple variable naming conventions in programming. We're basically going to flip snake case, which is all lowercase all the way across. Each word is separated by an underscore, and we're going to convert that to camel case, which is what we use in JavaScript. And the first letter, or the first word is going to be all lowercase, and then each subsequent word in the string is going to have a uppercase first letter. All right, so with this, we're going to have one parameter, which is going to be a string in camel case. And we're going to have one thing to return, which is going to be a string in, let's correct this. We're going to get an input in snake case, and our string is going to return in camel case. All right, example, see below. We've already got some tests written for us. All right, so steps to solve this one. Sorry, readjust this guy. All right, so we need to isolate each word in the string and remove the underscores between each word. Once we have each word as an individual element, we need to iterate through all of the words except for the first word and change the first letter to uppercase. All right, let's see here. Once we've done that, we will need to glue all of the elements back into a single string with no spaces, underscores between each word, and return the string. All right. So let's go ahead and get started with this. So let's make sure that input is what I think it's going to be. All right. So console.log input. All right. So I get my name is Kramer, first name, array of names. And so we want to get these into individual elements. So let's go ahead and take a look at what split does for us. All right. And if we just do it with an empty string, we get every character. That's no good. If I throw a space in here, everything is just thrown into one element. But the one kind of common thing that we're splitting on here is that underscore. So let's go ahead and toss that in there and see what happens. All right. So this looks pretty good to me. Now I've got each individual word separated, right? So we could pop this out of the console.log and we could say, let array of string equal this. All right. And now we need to start iterating. So if I do a for loop, so for let I equal 0, I less than array of string dot length, I plus plus, and let's go ahead and console.log do array of string I, and let's take a look here. All right, so we get my name is Kramer, first name, array of names. Now, I do not want to impact the first element in each of these arrays, right? So I want to skip over that. And since I'm starting at the 0 index, what I want to do is probably adjust this here to 1 so that I'm starting at the 1 index, which is going to be the second word in the string, or well, yeah, the second word in the string, the second element in the array. All right, so now I get name is Kramer, name of names, right? So name is Kramer, name, and then of name. So now I'm excluding that first word. So that's looking pretty good to me. All right, so now I need to figure out how to get just the first letter uppercase, right? And so how do I get one letter of a string in JS, right? So you should use the char at method at index 0. That's one way to do it according to free code camp. Yeah, so like char at a slice would do it. I would not use splice because that's not necessarily what splice is for. Just like slice. So we can try char at in here. So we could do char at 0.
So
Undefined.
can I throw something at you that I
Sure.
learned from a member of our group? In place of char at, can you just put a box 0 following your box I?
You can do that as well, right? Because the string has an index as well. And I don't know why char at 0 gave me undefined on that. No, char at is preferable than using a bracket. Well, let's read and see what they have to say about that. No, char at is preferable than using bracket notation as string at 0 returns an empty string, that for string instead of undefined in case of that. Okay, so this makes sense to me as well. Like honestly, I would have never thought of that without reading it. So basically what that's saying is, and let me just comment these out here real quick. Right, so if I do let string equal an empty string, and I do console.log str box 0, and I run this, I get undefined. And if I do this as char at 0, I still get an empty string there. And that shouldn't impact us in this problem, but I'll buy into the logic that it's preferable to use the char at, but I wouldn't yell at you for either one. All right,
Okay.
so let's
So
go
then
ahead. Go
are we
ahead.
doing char at, or are we going to leave it like that?
I'm going to throw it in at char at.
Okay. So then we're going to do a basically char at's just going to take the place of your box. It can be char at 0.
Yep.
Um,
Right, so there's that first letter. Right, and so now we want this to go to uppercase, right? So we can say to uppercase.
yep.
And now we see that, right? And so now that is the first part of our solution right there. So I can take this out of the console.log. And let's say let first letter equal this. All right. Now we need to solve for the rest of it. And this, because we're needing more than just one letter, we can use slice. And again, I wouldn't get mad if you did like a dot. So if I do array of string I do slice 0, 1, right? That also gives me the first letter, right? So we know that if I start counting at 0 and stop at 1, right, I'm just getting the first letter. So if I just do 1 and I don't want to put in an end into my slice, right, the ending is optional. I just do 1, there's the rest of my word, right? So the N is in the first letter, the rest of it's the AME, so on and so forth for all of these words, right? So I could say let rest of word. And it doesn't throw it at us in this because it's coming from camel case, but again, something I would probably do here is like 2 lowercase, just to make sure that like if anyone threw in something like this, right, that it's not going to throw it out of whack. All right. And now, once we've gone through each of these, we can then say array of string I is equal to first letter plus rest of words. So again, strings themselves are immutable, so I can't do anything to change the string that is represented here, but I can reassign it to something else. Right, and so now let's do console.log array of string I. Right, so that looks like what I want there. So we're looking pretty good there. So we're done with our for loop. Now we can take a look at, oops, console.log array of string. We can look at the whole thing. Right, so there is my name is Kramer. Right, and all we need to do now is glue everything back together, and which will be a join. Right, that looks pretty good to me. All right, so we can pop this out of the console.log and we'll return it. And let's see what we get. We get trues. All right. And so again, this is something where, like I said, as I solve each step, I am doing something, right? So like I'm doing my split, I see what it looks like, right? I'm iterating through, and before I start messing with anything, I console.log what each element looks like to make sure that I'm iterating correctly, right? And then in trying to upcase the first letter and grab the rest of the word all in one shot, I'm just trying to solve the first part of it, right? So, hey, can I grab the first character of this element? Okay, I've done that. Now let's send it to uppercase. Okay, I've solved for that part. All right, let's go ahead and work our way through solving for the second part of it, which is grabbing every character after the first character. Right, I get that, and I add an extra lowercase into it just to make sure. And then I glue everything together. I wanted to see what it looked like glued together. Great. Then I come out here, see what the array looks like with my new words, and then I glue my array together, see what that looks like. Everything looks good. Then I return it, right? And every single individual step that I did there, I was running it and checking out what it looked like so that if something went wrong, I'm fixing it at that step before I put an extra couple layers of code on it and it keeps being broke, and then I don't know where exactly I broke it at. All right. Any questions in here? All right, let's go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I saw that you did it kind of with the slice and splitting in 2 lines like that, but you could have done an additive on the first letter. It could have been like plus after your 2 uppercase, you could have done like a plus sign and added to that your array of string I dot substring 1.
Right. So I don't need these variables, right? So I could take these and put them down on this line. like this. This to me is just harder to read.
Okay.
And right, so a lot of times when I'm putting variables in here, same thing like in detention, like I need highest number. There's nothing I can do about that. But like the like I didn't have to do a separate for loop. Like I could have done a for each up here, right? Or a dot map. Uh, you don't like I don't always need all of these variables. A lot of times doing the separate variable just makes it easier to read. And also it allows you to be more descriptive with what's going on, right? So because without having to read array of string I dot char at 0 dot 2 uppercase and array of string I dot slice 1 to lowercase, especially if you don't know exactly what these do, you can just come over here, and if I'm writing good code, this is telling me that all of this means this is the first letter of the word and this is the rest of the word, right? And then here I'm gluing the first letter, or I'm concatenating the first letter and the rest of the word together. So whereas you don't need it, um, I I would also, so like I caution against writing too terse of code, right? And that is one of the problems of like when you do a lot of like code wars challenges or things along those lines, like delete code stuff. Like everyone's trying to write their solution in the smallest amount of code, right? I think I can see my solutions in here, right? So like if I don't know if I can see other people's solutions, right? So this is this is fewer lines of code than what I solved mine in, right? But if I asked you to tell me what's going on here versus what's going on here, like this code is telling more of a story, in my opinion, right? And not everything has to be like crammed onto one line. Right, like I didn't have to do an if else. I could have done this as a ternary, all these different things to make it smaller. But writing code so that you can come back and read it easier in the future, there's nothing wrong with that. And some places that you go to will have a focus on writing code in the fewest lines of code possible. But like where I work and in my professional career, that's never been like a concern. We want to write efficient code. Like we don't want to use a nested loop, which impacts performance, where like there's a solution without using a nested loop. But no one's ever yelled at me for having like an extra variable that helps tell the story.
No, that's helpful. I mean, it's just a matter of getting my brain to work that way. So yeah, no, I probably trying to understand too much, and that puts it in, and then trying to go too terse, which makes it harder to understand.
Yeah, and again, it's like it's this is like I said, like when you get over here, it's a competition. These are just as much as it's writing code, you're also playing a game, right? And I've got lots of I don't know, I think it told me what I've done. I don't know how many solutions. So 60 completed, right? And I guarantee you, like every single one of these ones that I look at, if I go in here and look at the solutions, there's going to be a much shorter version of what I wrote, right? And this guy, same thing, like even to here, right? Like we've declared two variables on the same line using a comma, which is perfectly legal. Uh, but honestly, you don't see it all that often in production code, right? This person broke it out. I mean, using a filter, and like inside a one line while loop just to make this as compact as possible, but it doesn't help, especially someone that's trying to learn. It doesn't help people understand what's going on with the big picture. Right. And again, versus like something like where I'm writing at more lines of code, right? Like this is 10 lines of code versus their 4 lines of code, but it's a little bit more spread out. To me, you can read each line and see what's happening on each line. All right. Close that back down. Any other questions on like how this one was solved? All right, so let's go ahead and look at challenges for the next one here. So that was camel case. Let's see. Let's take a look at arrays and loops for high score. Okay, so this one so again, sharing's on. I will send everyone back to the same teams. It's 7:58, so take another 4 or 5 minute break here. Do what you need to do. Once you get into your breakout rooms, I'm going to give you this one, and I'm going to try and give you I'm going to check in at about 15 minutes on this one. This one should be a little bit easier to solve, but again, if you solve it early, feel free to drop me a Slack message and we'll pull everyone back sooner if both teams solve it before then. Like I said, so we'll call it 8 o'clock right now. So I'm going to send you to the rooms, get started by about 8:05 or so. Pause the recording.